All right, welcome back to the Unweird Podcast. I'm Wayne Connor. For those of you unfamiliar with this podcast, it's about real conversations that lead to real progress in real time. Today, we're diving into a critical topic. How can we have conversations that don't just highlight our differences, but move us forward to solutions? Our guest today is Dr. Ansel Augustine, an Emmy-nominated producer, award-winning author, and a leader in faith, social justice, and cultural advocacy. He currently serves as the Assistant Director of African American Affairs for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He has spent decades building bridges between different communities, from his work in Black Catholic ministries to his leadership in prison outreach and cultural preservation. In a time when division feels like the default, Dr. Augustine's work reminds us that dialogue is a tool for progress, not just for debate. We'll talk about how faith and culture can help us listen better, communicate effectively, and work towards more solutions, even when we don't agree. Ansel, my brother, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We also have with us today Karl Connor from Keep America Moving Ahead, our sponsor of the Unweird Podcast, and he'll be joining us for part of this conversation as well. Welcome to the show, Karl.
Happy to be with you again, Wayne. As always, I'm hopeful that we get from this some action items, but provide some processes for the people who watch it to be able to go out and create the spaces to have the kinds of conversations that, while they may start out with differing opinions, lead to more understanding and then more action to get us to a more united place, right? So
Perfect.
Thank you again for joining us as well, Brother Augustine.
All right, glad to be here. Look, 3 alphas on here. There's a lot of light on here. All right. If your camera
Amen to that.
and if your podcast and what you're watching this video is a little bright, that's why.
There you go.
So, Ansel, I want you to share a little bit with our listeners about some of your professional and personal journey. So, can you just tell us a little bit about what inspired your work in ministry in racial justice and cultural advocacy?
All right. Most of my life is home in New Orleans. I lived in other parts of the country, Texas and other spaces, especially after Hurricane Katrina, trying to rebuild, trying to do certain things, locate family and friends, and bringing our youth. I was the youth minister at my home parish, St. Peter Claver in Tremay, after I graduated. That was my first job. Initially, growing up, I wanted to be a DJ. And so I worked in radio and in the music industry for a little bit. I won't name any record labels or anything like that. But back home, that's what I was doing, working block parties, entertainment company, doing all this stuff. But then one of my parental figures, for lack of better words, our pastor, Father Michael Jacques at St. Peter Claver, asked me one weekend, this is when I was in college, to chaperone one of our lock-ins. They were short male chaperones. And so when I went to the lock-in, these young people from my neighborhood who I hadn't seen because, I was in college, I wasn't in the neighborhood as regular as possible, doing what I was doing on where God had called me at that time. All of a sudden had conversation about, we remember you were friends with our cousin, you were friends with this. And I was like, okay. And then just building, as we talk about conversations, relationships with them. And I realized they genuinely cared about me as much as I cared about them. So the next thing I'm doing is every Wednesday when U Group would happen, I would try to find a ride from uptown to downtown so I could attend these evening meetings. And then I'm sacrificing my time on weekends to do stuff with them. And then eventually Father Mike and I had a talk, and he was like, you could get paid for this, like as a job. And he didn't tell me the truth about how much I wasn't going to make doing ministry work, but it's a sacrifice, right?
Right.
And so I changed my major from mass communications to sociology. Then eventually I got my master's. And then after Katrina, I went on and got my doctorate. But either way, it was a calling. I was in the space that I felt I was supposed to be at that time to do what I need to do. And even here right now, it doesn't make sense, the work I'm doing. Technically, as people try to remind me, whether it's to uplift or to put pressure on me, that I'm the quote unquote top Black Catholic under the bishops right now, to do this work, to advocate for our people and have these tough conversations. It's always that God will place you where he wants you. And it's not to necessarily to make you feel any pressure or do anything, but no matter where I've been, and Karl, you've seen me through the years, from when I had hair to now, right?
And vice versa.
Right? I hear you, brother. Is I've always been my authentic self. I've never tried to put on airs or anything like that. But I feel, and this was the mentorship I had, and what I've always done when I'm mentoring people, especially young people from the community, is to say, you have gifts. Use those gifts God has given you. Don't worry about what society is telling you. Don't worry about the peer pressure you may be getting from other people. Be who you feel you are called to be, and surround yourself with people who uplift that. So that's been the work I've done.
Was that were those conversations the moment you realized that there was a lot of power in the dialogue that you were having, or was it later in your ministry and mission in your journey that you really realized the power that those conversations and that dialogue was having?
I think for me, it's when I did my undergrad where you and I went, Loyola. But it was when I was at Xavier University of Louisiana, which is celebrating its centennial, XU. And when I went to the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, that I was in classes with theologians and fellow people working in Black Catholic ministry around the country that helped me realize, and I always knew this, I was spoiled at Peter Claver, St. Peter Claver, an Afrocentric Catholic church. We have the gospel music, we have the images of holy men and women that look like the people in the pews, different things like that. That I realized that how this was my faith, right? Yes, it was my faith, but how on a cultural level, this was my faith. So it was conversations that I was able to have there that I couldn't really have at Loyola on a regular basis about
Mhm.
how my culture connected with my faith. And so it was in that space that I realized the power that was there. So when I became youth minister full time, when I was actually paying me, right? That I was able to have those authentic conversations because I had the vocabulary and the verbiage to help these young people. And St. Peter Claver School, which was elementary school, which was my favorite place on the world, which unfortunately closed, was
Mm.
intentionally Afrocentric. So it wasn't just a school with black children doing Catholic stuff. It was a school with black children telling them about black theology and black cultural stuff that infused that. In fact, our school uniform had kente cloth in it, so it was intentional the way we did things. So for me, the power of those conversations uplifted the young men and women through the community by helping them realize who they are, but more importantly, whose they are, and the culture that connected them with that.
To that point, Ansel, it has been my experience over the years, and I think you're aware of this already. I went to a high school in New Orleans that was for kids who thought they wanted to be Catholic priests.
Mhm.
But prior to that, my entire elementary and preschool education was in environments that were primarily Black.
Mhm.
And while this may seem oxymoronic, the ability for people to have less divisive conversations among people who didn't look like them was strengthened more back then by having that almost, if you want to call it, segregated system than I find it to be now in this way, in that the people from my communities where I was in school had instilled in them who they were, to your point, a bit more before they got into the more diverse network of people.
Correct.
At least in terms of the everyday schooling type deal. Because I mean, I lived in a neighborhood where there was some, fairly good diversity. So there was white people around me, right? So it wasn't that I didn't have any contact with white folks, but in that everyday, all day kind of environment, particularly from ages, 5 to 12, when you're really forming your thoughts on who you are and how you are sit in this world, right? It was filled more with positive images of uh, strong Black folks who were able to fit in any environment, right? So by the
Right.
time I got to the majority environment, I was clear in who I was and who God put me on this earth to be, right?
Mhm.
And what I would and would not be subjected to, right?
Right.
In your work today, do you see that is holding true, that maybe there would be a bit more of that, if based on your experience, where there are schools that are predominantly Black, as well as your involvement in schools that are more diverse? Do you see that it is starting to level out so that those conversations are coming easier now in the more diverse environment?
Right. I think what I've noticed, and this is one of the challenges I have, and some of the advocacy work I'm doing in the role I have, is to get conversations going so we hear from the missing generation, which is the young adults.
Yeah,
They're leaving the church in droves, no matter the background, no matter their racial or ethnic background, right? And that's not just the Catholic Church, churches all over, right?
yeah,
But yet this is the most diverse generation that we've ever seen, especially in this country, right? And so when I have these conversations, I see the generation gap, the way that uh, baby boomers and Generation X, which they say now I'm a Zennial, 1977 to 1983. This is micro generation that went from analog to digital. I don't know. I don't know what I am, but wherever I'm at, I look at the world differently than millennials, Generation Alpha, and all the ones that are Gen Z, Generation Alpha, all these, the way they interpret images, the way they interpret information, and the way they communicate. And I think one of the challenges that we have is because these younger generations are raised by this technology, they there's a challenge of actually interacting with one another. So the conversations and the way we interact with them can't be the way that I was, sitting in a classroom, having a lecture forever, or even when I was an undergrad at Loyola, right? Even they asked me to teach a course online and, looking at Blackboard and all these other elements that I didn't have when I was at Loyola, it was a culture shock to me, right? It was more communal, hence what I had at Xavier, at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. And so for me, when we look at them, yes, they're what I see as a challenge for, especially when you talk to some Black Catholic young adults, if they haven't been exposed to it because of the integration, right? Many times the Black or brown or other experiences are put on the side in integrated surfaces and they focus on the Eurocentric models. It is eye-opening for them along with others. And, you see it all the time. For example, when I see young people that went to more integrated schools, and they might end up at a Xavier or a Howard's, because right here I worship at Howard University on Sunday evenings with the Catholic student group there. Some students, it's their first time at Howard. In fact, there are a couple of students from New Orleans, from some of our non-Black Catholic high schools that come to Howard, and they're like, uh, Mr. Ansel or Dr. Ansel, blah, blah, blah. And we have these conversations. I say, it's okay. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so it's just having that guidance there. But yet they want to know, and so you see this, what's this pendulum swing? And what
Mhm.
I've seen, where people that all of a sudden may come into Black Catholic ministry, there's a pendulum swing to be an ultra well, after the shock is there, they'll go to ultra Afrocentric, blah blah blah. And then as they continue to grow, it comes into a median, a central point where it's balanced. And so
Yes.
what I see, this is the same thing happening with this generation, is to have how to have this conversation when they're not exposed to certain things. Parents, they mean well, parents want to have the best for their children. So in their mind, the best is to go send them to an integrated space or, move into another neighborhood where, they might not be the majority, and so it's those realities and challenges that I feel and the work that we're doing trying to create that what's the word? Bridge that generation gap. So
Mhm.
my fight is trying to find where these Black Catholic young adults have gone, bring them to the table so we here create a safe space so they feel that they can openly share without accusation or judgment on
Yeah.
what their problems are, which is something we did 2 Novembers ago back at Xavier. We had a forum there with people around the country. But how do you follow up on that? You get them to the table,
Mhm.
you produce these documents, but how do you move it into action? And that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Mhm.
And in that you mentioned St. Peter Claver, and all three of us here are products of Catholic and Jesuit institutions and the values that those instill. And you mentioned St. Peter Claver a few times, and you have a documentary, Black Faith Matters, that really highlights St. Peter Claver and the community there in Tremé in New Orleans. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of that educational safe space in relation to how these folks in these communities really grow up in the faith and how they experience it.
So I want to go back to if I had my dream job, right? And there were times I was struggling, when I moved back from New York and I came back home. I was supposed to be campus minister, head of campus ministry at Loyola, and they were
Mhm.
having their budget issues and all this stuff. And so people are like, what would you be your dream job? Create your dream job. Well, it would have been youth minister at St. Peter Claver pre-Katrina.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and we know this, New Orleans was different before 2005, right?
Yeah.
Sense of community, sense of peace, sense of awareness, and sense of, like I said, fellowship was different. Um, but also, like I said, in St. Peter Claver specifically, like I said, intentionally Afrocentric and creating that safe space. And most of the kids in the school were not Catholic, but yet they felt safe there. Families
Mhm.
felt safe there. My youth ministry And I was the only full-time paid Black Catholic youth minister because of budgets in other parishes and other things like that. St. Peter Claver at that time was an Edmondite parish. Father Michael Jacques was an Edmondite, and they had money they could put in so they could hire me full time. Even though, like I said, salary was, I don't know what you want to call it, but it was what it was. It was part of the sacrifice. But what we created in that place, and it wasn't me. It was the advocacy of the staff, the culture of the area, the climate that we created with the adults that were there. Because I had to kick out some adults, unfortunately, that I inherited when I to help them understand this is about the young people. This is not about you controlling young people. It's about the young people um, exploring and finding themselves in this space. And it was that space where all of a sudden you group exploded. The space we had wasn't big enough because friends that were Catholic or people that were parishioners in the church were all of a sudden going down the street to the Lafitte projects, bringing kids there, or they would bring kids from school, their friends, because oh, come, and this is a safe and fun space, right? And I had a rule, y'all, and this is why I had to get rid of some of the adults that were there. I had a rule, and imagine how different society would be if we followed this rule. It was called the five times rule. And the five times rule was simply this: is unless it was an emergency, you could not criticize a young person in our space until you had loved them five times or shown them love five times. How much different would it be? And when I would come home, I usher or I'm a minister of hospitality. How much different would our churches be? How much different would society be if we showed love to people more than we were quick to judge and criticize, because of the way they appear, because of the way they come in, because of the way, unfortunately, yeah, some of them came in smelling like, stuff that they had smoked. You know what I'm saying? But yet,
Mhm.
I want you to know you're welcome here, and that's the way I was able to reach a lot of especially young men from the neighborhood when they realized, damn, Mr. Ansel really care about me, or this place, the adults that are there really care about me, and so they had a safe space or a safe person or a safe whatever. And for me, I think one of the things that attests to that, weekdays, I couldn't get any work done after 3 p.m. because as soon as high schools let out, they would just flood my office, even if there was no U group there, right? It was just that was their space. So for me, that's why St. Peter Claver was so strong. Is as time went on, we created adults and a climate and an environment where these young people felt like this is our space, and we could talk about any and everything.
In your national role, how is that translating? Because we know sometimes we tend to think of New Orleans as a special place and a different place, right?
Yeah,
But when you're really involved in deep communities like you get to be, we find that, yeah, there are areas of special nature here, but people are people, and
right.
there's a lot of crossover, right? So in your national role now, how do you see that translating nationally?
Nationally, I think for me is creating, like I said, even when we gather these young adults from around the country, or even when I have a meeting with just Black Catholic leadership, or even the bishops, whoever it may be I may be interacting with, I want to create an environment where they feel like they can be open and share. Put down your guards. Yes, there's some things, it's the church. You have the pomp and circumstance and, the way you have to carry yourself. But I think when people interact with me one on one, as you all know, I'm just genuinely me, and I want you to be genuinely you, so we could talk about things that are tough. So when I have my one-on-ones with different people, or whatever, preparing for a meeting, when we have the meeting, 9 times out of 10, people are able to express themselves as they see fit, even if someone has a different agenda or whatever. At the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish together for the common good for everyone? And I think that's how it's translated, because I do try to live out that five times rule with no matter who is in front of me.
Mhm.
No, it's powerful. I think, you having the ability to keep that safe space for the folks that you're speaking with. It obviously is working because they're filling your office. They're in your space. I've seen the comments online on social media with your regular posts, and they're interacting with you. And so tell us a little bit more about that safety, and how you can navigate having difficult conversations and encouraging the youth to have those sort of conversations amongst themselves, maybe when you're not present, to help them to create those safe spaces for others in their communities.
It's been a little bit more of a challenge now that I'm more of like, I hate to say it like this, but in the ivory tower, the headquarters, right? You know, I invite people to come here, but they don't come here, right? They don't want to come here, and for whatever reasons. And it's not like a parish office where people can come in and out and do whatever. But that's why I do the online posting, the weekly prayer reflections that I do online, and just tell people and give them nuggets of hope, right? And every Wednesday, and even though I pray for people on a regular, but I intentionally go to the Basilica. Back home, I would go to Rosary and Mass at St. Augustine Church, which is the oldest Black Catholic church in the country. St. Augustine, right there in Tremay. They had a Wednesday afternoon, 4:30 Rosary and Mass, and I would go there and I would pray for people's intentions, and I would ask them, "What do you want me to pray for?" And even now, it's the same. And these aren't church folk 9 times out of 10 that are asking me to pray for them. Back home, my church was mostly, Peter Claver, of course, but I felt fulfilled, even myself, the connection when I would be at the gym. When I was at the gym, my partners at the gym, they were like, "Hey, preach," that's my nickname. Like, "Come pray. Can I pray? Can you pray for this, that, and the other?" Or they'll text me. Or the cultural communities, the in the streets, the baby dolls, the Mardi Gras Indians, which I'm a Mardi Gras Indian, or the Skull and Bones, or musicians that I raised that came up at Peter Claver. People, I became that person, and I was honored, and I still am. They still text me or whatever for prayer stuff. So when I ask for prayers on Wednesday, my what do you call it, inbox or DM or whatever you call all that. I'm still learning the lingo, right? I haven't bought into TikTok yet, but anyway, they fill up with prayer requests, right? And then I'll walk down the street to the Basilica, to the Mother of Africa chapel, and I'll sit there and pray for people, right? But it's just intentionally people knowing that someone cares. And I think that's what we struggle with in society today over the years. I've seen it develop even more and more that people in a capitalistic society, in a social media world where we're not interacting on a regular, people become more sheltered, isolated, and sad to say, selfish. So for someone to actually care, and I do, it's powerful. It's powerful for people. It's powerful for me because I need it because I'm up here by myself. But knowing that there are people praying for me means a lot as well.
Look, I just got back from New York, and in a conversation with Mark Morial, actually the head of the Urban League, got reminded that one of the biggest intentions for Keep America Moving Ahead is to make sure that we have these conversations with everyone, right? And that it doesn't become sort of an elitist type movement here, right? Like, I mean, we sit on this call now and we have enough degrees for about 8 people, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we are clear, right, that the majority of the people in America should not care about all those degrees when we're talking about getting better at having conversations among each other so that everybody benefits and America benefits. And that essentially, eventually, rather globally, we are seen as a stronger place because of our unity based on our expressed from day one almost acceptance of everyone and what skills they bring to America to make it a better, more complete place, right? And of course, also from the beginning, the expression that everybody could come here and express their spirituality in unfettered ways, right? And however you want to do it, you do it, right? And so, for me, I have a renewed interest in making sure that to the point you just made, we're talking to everyone. Right. We're getting everybody's opinion, the person in the gym, the person in the classroom, the person working in the grocery store, the person who is, home caretaking, all of those folks, right? Because every aspect of what all those people are doing is what makes up America. And then eventually leads to the policies and things that happen in America that position us globally, right? And we've had, and we can debate about this rightly or wrongly sometimes, right? Been seen around the world as a helpful nation, right? Particularly in places that are in need of that additional assistance. Based on time just going by and economies passing up certain areas of the world with regard to their ability to keep up with it and stay in a space where they're able to manifest prosperity for all their citizens, right? And so we had a crucial role there. And recently we've been diminished in that, of course, right? Based on current politics. But in large part, where you sit in your world of having these conversations of everyday life with people, but infusing spirituality in that, right? how do you see us moving forward in a more constructive way to help our policymakers, quite
Right.
literally, do better, think better, keep us in a space where not only the folks domestically are cared for, which is
Hmm.
a concern as well, right? A big concern,
Right.
but where we're also not damaging our global relations, because if we continue to destabilize people around the world, right, to me at least, it puts us and them in a space where it's not as easy to make Christian decisions,
Correct.
right?
And as a couple of things came to my head as you were asking that question, Carl, is first the rule that I live by, and it's funny how some of my best friends are uh, Muslim imams. In fact, some of the work that I did back home was with the Nation of Islam. You know, they've asked me to come speak at the mosque over there. You know, Brother Willie Muhammad, I love him to death. You know, and I've done stuff together in the community, you know, together, and there's this care for the common good. And he um, reminds me, and this is how I live my life out, is the two main rules that Christ gives us is love God with all your heart and love one another as I have loved you. And I try to live that out, however it can, and no matter who it is, and I try to be the thorn in the side to remind people that that's what we're called to do. And so I'll tell you two quick stories. When I came home from Mardi Gras, a couple of weeks ago, my first time home in a minute, I landed that Thursday night. Um, when I landed, I went to the Seventh Ward down from Circle Food Store. My friend was opening a business down the street, so I went to check on them and meet everybody over there. I went outside for a second. I ordered food for everybody. I went outside to wait for the driver to pull up, and I looked at the corner, St. Bernard and Villeray. There was a bunch of people, same T-shirts with the infant on it, candlelight balloon service. And one of the older men, when I say older, he was my age, but one of the older people of the group was walking towards me. And I was like, hey, man, what's going on? Come to tell me his granddaughter was killed. Right. And I was like, oh, man, I'm so sorry. And I would just move. This is how I am. Like, brother, can you need anything? Can I pray for you? He's like, you a minister? And he saw the cross around my neck. I said, something like that. I'm not ordained. So, I mean, I was like, oh, come pray with us. And so I went to the corner and I said a prayer, did whatever I could just to offer some type of hope at that moment, right? Now, fast forward about that was Thursday, so Tuesday, Mardi Gras Day. I'm running with the Indians, drumming and doing whatever in the streets. He saw me, hey, it's preach, right? You know what I'm saying? And I like, and the crowd was there, but they were in a moment of joy after a moment of sorrow. So it's just that type of stuff, just being in those spaces and places. Um, and so I share that because we have to communicate, like you said, to all people. Everybody's voices have to be heard. That's why it's so important for me to see who is on the margins, as Pope Francis says. Are the people on the margins that are normally not included, whether it's prisoners, homeless, people of color, whoever it is, are their voices being heard? Or, like you said, Karl, are the people that are able to be in spaces because of their degrees or because of their connections or because of their networks, are those the only voices being heard? And so, one thing that struck me, excuse me, one of the matriarchs in my life, God rest her soul, was Miss Leah Chase. She was our church member at Peter Claver. She's the chef at former chef until she passed at Dookie Chase Restaurant, which is a home of the civil rights gatherings here in New Orleans. Or there in New Orleans. I'm in DC now, and
Yes.
she's
You're
also,
always here. You're always here.
I know, right? It's right here, right? But she's also the inspiration for Princess Tiana, Disney princess, Princess and the Frog. Well, anyway, when I went home, you know, Ash Wednesday morning, I was ushering 7:30 mass at Peter Claver, getting my ashes to cover the scar on my head from where the bees hit me at the parade, right? And I got to talk about Deacon Allen, God bless him, but he didn't give me a cross; he gave me a blob that day. But anyway, I saw Miss Stella, Miss Leah's daughter, who runs Dookie Chase, and she was like, "Oh, Ansel, if you before you leave, come see the new space." So I was like, "Okay." And what they did was they turned the second floor where the intentional meetings would happen, strategy meetings of civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Avery Alexander, all these people that would be, strategizing in New Orleans. She took me up there and she showed me the beautiful artwork. She showed me the different things that were there. And I don't want to spoil it too much. And I wasn't allowed to take pictures and I didn't want to, do anything inappropriate. But there was a mirror in there in the middle of the mural, which is a reminder of that we have a role to play still
Yes.
today.
Mhm.
And how do you see yourself doing that work now? And so when you ask the question, how do we have these authentic conversations, honest conversations, tough conversations, um, but also make sure for me, and this has been my priority because I was in that group, that the marginalized voices are at the table, and so that they're allowed to make decisions for themselves, but also impact decisions for everybody. Because at the end of the day, we are all, and this is the spiritual point, God's children made in His image and likeness, and therefore everybody has a value, everybody has a part to give to this, and a gift to share. So that's how I would answer that.
You know, I was reading recently about how we attack divisions by addressing exactly what the person is saying directly head on, and what we frequently do is counteract their points with one of our own that is in direct contradiction to what they've said. And I think one of the things that I know from my interaction with the faith, and that I'm hearing from your description here, is that somehow faith can bypass that and open up a door where we can find the commonalities without having that conflict. Can you share in your work maybe a little bit about how that faith helps you to bypass those divisions amongst people when we frequently retreat into those corners, and how it helps to bridge those gaps and bring us together instead?
No, thank you for that. As you asked that question, Wayne, I think about what I said earlier is God will never place you in a place without you purposely supposed to be there and also Him being there with you, right?
Mhm.
So even when I'm in these meetings or even spaces where tough decisions are being made, I'm leaning on His understanding, not mine. And what I want Him to guide me in is what do you want me to gain from this and who do you want me to hear? Because evidently everybody has something to share. Um, where I am most fulfilled, and I get fulfilled in church, of course, but where I'm most fulfilled, like I said, is in those interactions at the gym, the street, or even when I'm with the prisoners. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a wisdom there that we can't tap into and forget that that's there, right? And so we have to have those conversations and those gatherings. But for me, when we look at who and how God is calling us to talk and interact with one another, our faith sometimes is challenging, and sometimes we have those obstacles within our faith when we talk about doctrine. They don't believe this, so they can't be with us. And I'm like, okay, you know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, um, God created them, so there's something that this person has to offer, even if it is the thorn in our side or the person that might be irritating us or whatever, and that might be God getting our attention. And are we
Yes.
paying attention
Yes.
to God trying to get our attention? And
Yeah.
you know, um, but that's where faith comes in. So one of the things I did, and I talk about it in the upcoming book that's coming out, I tell the story about how I was almost carjacked when I was in New Orleans. When I first moved back and I was helping Bishop Cherie at Peter Claver, I took back over the Office of Black Catholics again in New Orleans, and we were bringing back after the pandemic the first Martin Luther King service day, which we hadn't done in years because of the pandemic. And I was organizing stuff that Saturday night and I was going to pick up my friend who wanted to get out the house. So I was driving down one of the side streets to get to Earhart Boulevard, and that auto. I don't know if it's AutoZone. I forget what it is, but anyway, it's an auto shop right there on Burdett and Earhart. The stop sign that was there, there was a car in front of me at the stop sign, and it was sitting there. I tapped my horn. Person got out, gun in hand, mask on. So I was freaking out. So I cracked my door. So the light was on. I'm sitting like this, looking at my rosary. I'm like, Lord, I don't know. All I kept saying was, Lord. I didn't know the words of anything else to say, right? I'm just saying,
Yes.
Lord, in my head. The young man came around. I could see it was a man by the facial features under the through the mask. When he got to me, his eyes got big. He took off running, got back in the car, said something to the driver, and they sped off. And the only thing I could think was that one of my kids, was that one of my former youth group kids or students or whatever. It didn't make sense to me. And so I reached out to folks, and it was the person that responded was Brother Willie Muhammad, at the Nation of Islam. And then we talked to other ministers and people, and we started this campaign. Had billboards around the city, stop the violence, squash the beef before the grief, and had a casket on it,
Mhm.
right? And they had a hotline that people could call if there was issues in the community that they wanted to address. So really trying to do conflict mediation, conflict resolution. But it was those conversations we had amongst ourselves as people of faith that we tried to bring and live out our faith, put our faith into action to address a need in the community. And so that's where faith comes in, where we honestly, if you're connected with the people in the margins or in the trenches, look at what are the needs in the community and how does our faith call us to act and address those needs together, not us coming in as saviors.
Mhm.
I'm not trying, Christ is the only savior I know, right? From my faith perspective. And, other people have theirs, but how do we live that out by helping the community address the needs on its own and being,
Yeah.
as they say, as Pope Francis says, accompanying them on the journey, not doing it for them, not
Not
telling
doing
them what to do, but accompanying them and letting them dictate to us what they need.
Something
and what I'm
empowering about that, right?
Yeah.
Accompanying them on the journey because it
Yes.
isn't ours to walk for them.
Correct.
correct. But
Correct.
the thing to also remember, to your point earlier, and I live by this all the time, is we are always where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there.
Yep.
The reason you're there may not be clear initially. At some
Correct.
point, your hope is that it does become clear. And in your carjacking scenario, the point that became clear was there was an action needed to try to prevent these things from happening on the front end, and it
Amen.
led you to action. And from our perspective here at Keep America Moving, I mean, that's what we want. We want people not just to talk about stuff, not just to sit in the bad things that happen, right? Or even sit in the good things that happen, right? Make it complacent. We want you to move to action to
Mhm.
help more than just yourself or
Amen.
those right around you. And so in that instance, the carjacking was the motivation, right?
Mhm.
If we sat on this call, we could all go through other incidents that probably put us in a space to move forward and do things, right? I mean, the reason we're here today for me is because I sat in some really partisan conversations in my professional career,
Right.
for 15, almost 20 years, really, I guess. That, at the end of it was, I stopped and I had to say, what can I do to make this better? Right? Like, because I tell this people all the time, in America, if you're lucky, you can, from an economy standpoint, you can earn your way out of everyday issues and having to
Oh,
worry
yeah.
about them as much, right?
Right.
But that doesn't really relieve you of the responsibility to others, right?
Amen.
You can
Amen.
certainly take that road, right, and do that and live a life where you just let it all go by without you, right? But at the same time, for me, I couldn't do that, right? I literally I sat in it and I said, all right, I'm done with this on a professional level to a large extent now, but how can I help this be better? And I start and I sit and I think about Wayne and his generation, and then
Yeah.
Wayne's son now, right? And it's like I got to do what I can do to help them have a different experience and hopefully a better experience, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure I said it to Wayne when he was in high school. I've said it to my own son. I'm hopeful that this current generation is a generation that gets it right with regard to how we interact and
Mm.
how we continue. Because to your point earlier about more kids being in diverse environments for schooling at a younger age, yes, and that happens. But can that sustain itself through the years when you start to realize, when everybody in that group starts to realize that, at least in the US, there's a monetization aspect to your education and opportunities?
Yeah.
How do you react to that? Do you start to see other people as a threat to a piece of a pie that you think is limited, right?
Mm.
And it's been my experience in my conversations with younger people that is when the divisions really start
Mhm.
with younger people these days. And unfortunately, those who were historically benefited by divisive conversations and divisive laws, right? When they get to that point, they start to ease into doing those things or supporting those things to
Correct.
try to protect what they think. And I call it the theory of scarcity,
Mm.
because they think the resources are scarce, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, if nothing is proven by where we sit today, with several people who sit at valuations of $500 billion or $1 trillion, that answer of scarcity is a false one. It's a
Right.
false narrative, right? And it shouldn't lead to everyday people, and it's the majority of the 99.99% of us who
Mhm.
don't have $1 trillion, right, going at each other in ways that are divisive and create a space where we literally forget our own, call it spirituality, call it organized religious teaching, however you want to categorize, right?
Right.
We forget to be human
Well,
because we start to worry about the selfishness that comes with that theory of scarcity, right?
in his document, and this is what was inspirational to me. Uh, uh, I forget which document, but you can Google it. Pope Francis always challenges the notion of capitalism as the biggest threat to human dignity, you
Mhm.
know, and how we, like you said, the theory of scarcity, where is that originating in, the theory and the mindset of capitalism, and he challenges that, with scripture and with our reality of how we're supposed to act as people of God.
Yeah, and I think, in economics, I think we view it as a space for winners and losers.
Mm,
But in faith, I think there's a space for us all.
correct.
And so I think, how do we continue to realize that there is a place for all of us? And that, yes, there are winners and losers in certain games of life, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you're a winner or loser in all of life. There will be another opportunity for you, and you have to be open and willing to share that space with others, to seek out those opportunities and take advantage of them when they come to you. And so, a couple of things that you mentioned earlier, I want to touch on. One, you mentioned your book, and you didn't mention the title. It's "Praying with Our Feet," and it's all about taking faith beyond words and into action. In the same way that Kama's mission is to take these to transform the dialogue, amongst us all, and turn it into action that takes progress. Can you tell us what really inspired you to write "Praying with Our Feet"? And what do you hope that readers take away from this book when they get a chance to read it? And tell us also when the book is due to be published.
Okay. It's available now for pre-order on loyolapress.com. But comes out June 10th. I think for me, one, Loyola Press, I'm Jesuit educated, right? Loyola University. Uh, and I appreciate the Jesuits in regards to how they really tried their best to address social justice issues, right? Putting faith into action. And they get a lot of flack for it, because they're seen as sometimes too social justice oriented, even though there's really not such a thing. I think if you're doing social justice, you're doing what God called us to do, making the world a better place. Um, but one of my favorite Jesuits, and I hate to say it like this because I have plenty of Jesuits that are friends, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the most inspirational is Father Greg Boyle, who works with the gangs in Los Angeles, right? White Jesuit priest, dedicated his most of his ministry, their homeboy industries is what it's called. And I've heard him speak, and I'll just be completely honest and transparent. I'm like a fanboy at the exhibit booth, like hey, Father Greg, and he whatever. But he when I found out he was willing to write the postscript for that book, man, I was like, all right, I was in hog heaven, right? And so, but for me, I've lived my life in a way that there's a saying, someone sent me this post, and I'm gonna try to say it the best way I possible. Hopefully, I get it right. There's a difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. Peacekeepers don't care about resolving anything. They just want the noise to stop, right?
Mm.
But in order to be a peacemaker, um, you have to confront the issue, deal with it, and try to broker peace in the midst of it. And that's why Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," right? And I want to be a peacemaker, and that's what I was modeled by, Father Mike, God rest his soul, Bishop Cherie, who was one of the African American bishops and was a mentor to me, God rest his soul, Sister Eva Loomis, Sister Eva Regina, um, who was like a mom to me, and she's used to be the mother superior of the Sisters of the Holy Family. So all these holy men and women, ordained and unordained, that God put in my life, I saw them being peacemakers. And it's too many times church folk want to be peacekeepers, right? And we don't want to be uncomfortable, but God calls us to be uncomfortable. That's why it's important to have the uncomfortable conversations. That's why it's important to go to the margins and have those uncomfortable experiences, because that's when we get closer. And so for me, living that out, I've been ostracized, I've been blackballed, I've been called a troublemaker, I've been called whatever, because I see injustice within institutions or organizations, and I've been forced to call it out because I know how it's affecting the people I love most in my community. And so, it doesn't make sense, why I'm in certain places to me initially, but I know God put me there, and so I'm gonna be my authentic self and be that peacemaker. And so for me, that's why I was inspired to write the book. Loyola Press, I've spoken to them for years, and they're like, "When you gonna write for us? When you gonna write for us? When you gonna write for us?" During the pandemic, I wrote the other book, Leveling the Praying Field. Um,
Mhm.
the one that got the award, and it was a issue of talking about racism in the church, because it was written during the reality of George Floyd's murder, right? And it was during the pandemic, and I had nothing else to do, and Orbis Books wanted me to write a book for them, and I was like, let me write this, not knowing, Bishop Cherie would write the afterword, but and he passed on, and Father Brian Massengill, who's the top Black Catholic theologian on anti-racism, would write the forward. But it was a resource because as I was being asked to help put these websites and statements together for all these Catholic organizations, I realized there was nothing from a Catholic perspective to have this anti-racism conversation with youth and young adults and those that work with them, campus ministers, whoever. And so that's why we wrote that book. And then this one, like I said, is looking at Jesuit spirituality, meaning seeing God in everything, contemplative spirituality, but using that as a platform to talk about putting our faith into action, not just praying in the church, but as I think it was a Jewish rabbi that said it during the Selma March, but to pray with our feet, putting our faith into action. And so, prayer is good. And I prayed regularly. I prayed before we started recording, before I logged on, because I wanted this to be God speaking to me, not just Ansel, right? But prayer also calls us to do something. We should be moved to do something. And that's what the holy folks in my life, whether they were in the church or outside of the church, have modeled for me.
Nice. If our listeners want to get some inspiration from that and want to pray with their feet and be called into action, but they don't know how,
Mm-hmm.
can you share a piece of advice for those listeners, how they can get on their feet
Mm-hmm.
and start taking steps forward?
Well, wherever you're at, I would look at where are the homeless shelters? You know, where are the people that are on the margins in your society? It'll be different in different places, right? Where are the places that, like I said, I have family and friends that are incarcerated, right? And I dedicate the book to them because they're a source of inspiration and hope to me. But how can you visit those that are forgotten? Prisoners, families, after years and years, they might be there on a regular, but it costs to visit, it costs to communicate, as we were talking about, whether it's a phone call or an email. How can you serve those that are most on the margins and let them know that they are loved and that they matter? Right?
Yes.
Young people are struggling with mental health crises on a regular, visiting group homes if you're allowed to, or doing service. The funny thing, they're joking with me earlier. I don't know if you remember, I used to play Santa Claus during the holidays back home. And the difference, I played it up here. The difference, it was actually cold up here during Christmas, right? And
Yeah.
so I wasn't sweating in that suit. But being a source of light and joy, if God gives you blessings, financial or whatever, it's not for you to hoard, it's for you to share. And what does that look like? And that's how we build those spaces and places. So it's not about just, all right, I'm just going to write a check. It's important to write the check. Let
Mhm.
me be clear. But how do you follow up to make sure that connection is there? And it calls us to be intentional. So looking at websites, Catholic charities, they're struggling right now with budget cuts and different things that are going on. They've unfortunately had to reduce migration services here because of budget cuts and stuff that is there. So there are a lot of people that are fearful right now. There are a lot of people that are scared. How are you engaging those folks? You know what I'm saying? Not to say not to come in as this is what you need to do, this is what you need. No, but how are you coming in to engage them so they feel heard and loved? How would you want to be feel heard and loved? And sometimes that's taking time. We're in the season right now when we're recording this in the season of Lent, right? In the Catholic Church, a time of introspection as we recognize things and look at things as we look head toward Easter. How are you looking at yourself? Where do you need to be loved, right? Because you can't love if you're not loving yourself. So for us, it's not about us proving that we're right, but it's about showing the world that the world is okay as it is. I mean, in the people that in the world, right? We're not here to fix anybody. That's not our job. But we're here to fix a broken system that other people are suffering from. And that goes with those conversations because we don't know what to fix unless we talk to one another. So,
Right.
Mm, powerful, powerful. Well, look, I think we're running a low on time here.
right.
So I want to close by saying, Ansel, this conversation, I think, really has been a master class in the power of faith-driven action. The role of dialogue and building solutions, is incredibly important. And your work is a reminder that real progress can happen not when we just speak, but when we listen, when we engage, and when we act. And in your words, or in the words of that Jewish rabbi, when we pray with our feet. And for our listeners, just another reminder, Ansel's upcoming book, Praying with Our Feet, is coming out in June, available for pre-order now. So if you're looking to find some inspiration in how you can live out your values with purpose, I think that book is going to be an invitation for you to become a part of something bigger. So we want to keep this dialogue going. We want you all as listeners to share your thoughts with us on social media. Please follow, like, and subscribe, and continue to build this movement, and lead us through action. Ansel, one of the things that we like to do here in the Unweird podcast, and Karl does it frequently, so I'm going to take an opportunity to do it myself this time, is extend a very warm welcome to you as a part now of the Unweird Coalition.
All right.
And we want to welcome you into it. We think your work is an embodiment of the mission that we have at Keep America Moving Ahead, and part of what we're trying to educate folks on through this podcast. So welcome to the Unweird Coalition. Keep the conversation going. Subscribe to Unweird and follow us at the Comma Community